Welcome to the Chaturanga Vinyasa tutorial. If you have not yet looked at our down dog tutorial, definitely go check that out. It's got a lot of tips and such that will help you in this tutorial as well. This tutorial is great for anyone looking for more information on their Chaturanga Vinyasa, right? If you've been in a class and you're like, I'm not really sure if this is the correct alignment, you're in the right place. We're gonna break down plank, the lowering position, and then that up dog position. We're gonna go through the movement transitions of it. We're gonna talk about the breath cues. We're gonna talk about misalignments and modifications and how to work in a more sustainable way. And we'll talk about some wrist warm-ups too, and kind of helping you figure out what that angle is for you and how to work it a little bit more without injuring yourself. Chaturanga is challenging because it is something that is repetitive, right? And you can start to develop really unhealthy movement patterns if you're doing this in a way that isn't functional for your body, right? It's just like running. Like you don't want to run turning in and out your feet or with bad knees. Right? We want to make sure that we're giving ourselves the tools to make this practice something that helps us find overarching balance in our bodies. I want to emphasize that this tutorial and all tutorials, all my classes, the way I teach is not a way of fixing you, right? We are not changing who you are and how you look and anything about you as a person. This is all a way of giving you access to yourself, right? Reorganizing how the body moves and functions so you can start to participate in making choices about how you move and how those movements are coming in from the outside of your mat and onto your mat, and ways that we can maybe even begin to find more balance in the overarching landscape of your life, not just in the movement itself. So if you do start to find yourself leaning into negative self-talk or just comparison mode, stamp it out. That's not what this is about. This is about helping you reach new levels of your yoga practice. Let's do it. We're going to now go through the setup, right? The setup of plank, much like we found in the setup of down dog, is the same. And this allows for us to get the proper space between the hands and the feet. So when we shift forward into Chaturanga, we're working towards finding that angling in the arms that Chaturanga Dandasana has, right? 90 degrees eventually. When you start setting up for Chaturanga Vinyasa and your plank, you want to start by getting the heels and the balls of your feet stacked and then the hands and the shoulders stacked. And I'm just going to run us through a quick flow so you can see what Chaturanga Vinyasa looks like. I'm going to pull forward with my weight, then I'm going to lower halfway down. I'm going to flip the feet and lift into a back bend, looking up, and then I'm going to move from the low belly to get the hips up and back for down dog. Our down dog tutorial was really effective in giving us information around how to wrap from the shoulder and then figure out how to find that arrangement of the hands. So this is going to be super relevant in how we're setting up our plank to our lower plank position of Chaturanga Dandasana. So I always think that doing this off the arms can be a little bit more accessible to start. So a great way of doing that is just sitting like I am, or sitting in a position that's comfortable, maybe with both sit bones even on the ground, and putting your hands right in front of you. When your hands are in front of you, you'll see pretty quickly what your natural inclination is to do with the arms. Like a lot of us will go really narrow, too wide, too high, too low. You want your hands directly in front of your armpit space. And you're gonna be drawing your arms, your shoulders down the back and then pushing through first finger and thumb without letting your rib cage become affected by this. Now, spreading the fingers super wide in your plank pose is a great way to help you figure out how to flatten this area, but it's not something that you necessarily have to keep, right? I want to be able to navigate the weight of my body onto my fingertips, much like the toes do for the feet when we're shifting forward. They stop you from falling. So if you're spreading your fingers way wide, you're going to lose access to that control. You'll notice the wrist flexion here, right? How does that feel for you? And in a moment, we're going to do some exercises that can just give you some access to warming them up and kind of priming this area. But this movement can just give you an idea of, like, if you're here already and you're pushing as much as you can, you're probably not going to be going as far forward when we come to our tippy toes, or you might use a tool of one of the modifications we talk about later. So now that we've looked at the arms from the front, let's look at it from the back view so you can see exactly what the shoulder blades are doing as we work through the actual dropping into Chaturanga. I'm going to start like we did in the down dog tutorial by taking my hands behind the head and drawing my elbows forward. And then I'm just going to actually let the arms come right in front of my shoulders, right? We wanna find that wrap first and then push through that knuckle and thumb. Now you'll notice right away that my shoulders are not squeezing together. My chest is really broad down the back, and I'm gonna lift through with the heart. Now when I start to bend my elbows, the shoulders totally come towards each other, but they are by no means squeezing together, right? The elbows are not crunching into the sides, and my hands are staying right in line with my arms. Now what we'll often see is this feeling start to happen, which is what we don't want, and we'll start to see this feeling. You'll also notice sometimes people get really caught up and then they start to hood over themselves when they lower. What is the Chaturanga component of all of this, right? Chaturanga is the lowering position of that plank pose, and it looks a little bit different than we will find in other push-ups at gyms and all the other variations that are out there. So when you're in this position, once you set up your plank, the Chaturanga is here, right? And so what you'll start to find with this is the movement of the elbows stacked with wrists and the shoulders right in line with the elbows. We are trying not to let the tops of the shoulders hood in. We are trying not to dump into the low back space and kind of lose the integrity of our front line. And we're expanding the front while we're strengthening it. And this gives us so much strength and space and support with that next moment of that back bend, which also stretches us and gives us a little bit of strength on the back side of the body to find balance. Now that we've talked about the arms a little bit and how the shoulders are in the moving transition of Chaturanga, let's just dissect some common things we might see in plank. So when you're setting up your plank, now that we have the distance set, you want to make sure that you're not dropping the hips down too low, you're not lifting them up too high, and that you've got your hands really set up. You'll also notice this kind of movement in the chest, like you might hear push the floor away and then you push a little bit too much. You're gonna try to push enough to where the shoulders can draw down and down the back and the chest can lengthen forward. The head also tends to fall low. If that happens, you'll kind of notice everything drops. Chin forward can really be a great tool for lengthening the chest with the scoop of the belly. What are your feet doing and how do we flip the feet? When do we flip the feet? So once you've set up your plank position, there are really two ways to do this. You will progress forward first, then down, flip the feet, then lift, go back, and then flip the feet again. You may also find you've built the strength up to come forward, flip both feet, then lift into up dog, and then go back to down dog. A common misalignment I see with the feet flipping. So this is something that's going to really affect how your low back feels and the support of your back bend. Well, really the whole thing, the whole process of lowering to the back bend. You'll kind of find, and this happens I think for people with a little bit more tightness in the fronts of their ankles, they come forward and there's like this out and then it scrunches up in the front and up. So you want to find as much length through the top of your ankle as you can when you flip and engagement from inside to outside. So that spreading of the toes thing can be really effective for that. When your feet are engaging in lengthening both sides of your leg, you're probably not finding the integrity of your hip muscles to support the lower back space. So I would just keep an eye on that and making sure you're working towards integrity there. It takes time. It's a movement pattern that might feel really good in some ways, but over time it can cause injury. I want to talk about a style of moving through this I've seen many yogis practice that I am not necessarily a fan of, but I think can be done if it's done with integrity. So the way I teach it, Chaturanga, is moving the shoulders over the wrist, but you will often see people practice by moving back, then pointing the toes and going up into your up dog. So Essentially what's happening is the shoulder stays in line with the wrist, and then when the feet point, that's when the weight shifts. I don't necessarily think that this is a bad way of moving. I think what happens though is people aren't able to hold the integrity of the wrists, the palms, the chest staying broad as everything's lowering. And we start to see a lot of things fall apart there. What also accompanies this is a misalignment that I'm not a fan of. This snaking through, or it's sometimes done like that to Chaturanga. Now, when I say I'm not a fan of it, I'm not a fan of it in the sense of, I don't think it's the best way to build the most balance into your body, but it also might just feel good to somebody. Like that might be what just makes them meditate and like move, and the freedom of that is what they're looking for. I am not a right or wrong kind of person when it comes to this practice. I think there are strong choices you can make, and sometimes what works for one person doesn't work for everyone else. So if adding a little bit of flair to your Chaturanga flow is what is making your day, go for it, but work intelligently. What can we do to assist the shoulders in that work towards 90 degrees? Setting up your plank, heels and balls of the feet stacked, everything as we normally do. You're gonna lengthen the chest, pull forward first, and then drop the knees down from there and untuck the toes. This gives you a lot more support. So instead of just dropping the shoulders down past 90 degrees and going too low, you can now work in a way that is more supported at a higher angle, or maybe at the angle to push up into the up dog back bend. I love blocks. I think they provide a great resource for finding stability and space and just overall support in your practice, right? So this is a good way of just feeling supported, but also helping you establish strength over time. You're gonna place a block underneath the center of your chest. And I have two because mine are a little shorter. And you're gonna place one at the center of your hips. And you might have to adjust this a little bit and figure out that distance for yourself from your plank. So once you have it set up, you're gonna slide forward as normal and you lower, and there are the blocks, right? So I'm not just kind of collapsing into them. I'm gonna use the blocks to give myself a moment to scoop the low belly, kick through the heels, energize the legs, press the hands, hug the elbows in, draw the shoulders in and down the back just slightly, and chin forward. And now I can really find that movement of halfway without losing all of my support. I'm building slowly from the ground up. Up dog. So up dog is the last movement in this progression. Everything is relevant to up dog that is relevant to what we've come from. We're just moving the body now in more of a back bend sway than that strengthening factor of holding space with the arms. So when you start to transition, you are pushing up from that lower position up into your up dog, and you're working towards doing it without falling into the ground and then pushing up. Up dog is the stretch factor, right? It's going to open up the space that we've just done a lot of work to strengthen. So you're going to come from your Chaturanga, push up into your up dog, and the arms shouldn't really have to change too much other than straightening the elbows. You're still doing the full engagement of the palm. You're wrapping in at the top. The shoulder blades are not pressing together. They hug in and down the back. The legs are super elongated and engaged. And then the chin can lift to help express the chest further. And right, this is gonna give you all of that stretch from the base of your feet all the way to the tip of your chin. This is Cobra Pose. It's a great modification for up dog if you're feeling any issues happening through up dog, especially in the low back or just tension in the shoulders. This is King Cobra, a pose progression you can work into eventually from up dog, where you bring your toes to your head and you make a full circle. One of my favorite components of this part of the practice is the breath work of it, right? When I first started figuring out how to incorporate breath and movement in a more mindful way, this was where I really learned it, because it's a hard place to learn it because it takes a lot of endurance, but when you start to find it, it's like everywhere else, you have so much more space, right? And learning how to breathe in a moment of strength and learning how to breathe in a moment of stretch is a challenge, right? And this really teaches you how to find it. So we're gonna do this by talking about it from our forward fold, because this is commonly a place you would come back from. So I'll teach it the way that I find is most accessible for people. Once you find a forward fold, you would take your half lift, right? So you're gonna inhale and lengthen the chest. The exhale would be 2 gestures, a fold and a step back to plank. Then your inhale would draw yourself forward. Your exhale would lower you down. Your next inhale would be up dog. And then the exhale takes you back to down dog. Now, the next method would be a little swifter in the sense of more gestures with less breath cues. So it will look like this. Your half lift would lengthen you out with an inhale. The exhale folds you, takes your feet back, draws you forward and down. Then the inhale again lifts you to the back bend. And the exhale takes you to the down dog. So I stepped it back, but you also will see people practice it like this. Inhale, half lift. Exhale, chaturanga. So it's a little bit more of a jump back, and that turns into eventually floating back, crowing back, handstanding back, right? So you can really build onto this when you feel your breath expanding and your practice expanding in that way. Let's go over some wrist stuff that you can do before a practice, before it even starts, to get going and get that space primed. First, just starting by lifting your hands up and flexing the hands back and holding that for a few breaths. Then you're gonna take your hands down and forward and try to pull the fingers towards the wrists. And it's not aggressive, you're just gonna get a nice stretch through here and feel the forearms working. And then as you start to feel good with that, you're gonna go nice and slow and just flip back and forth. Just doing your best to breathe, warming up the forearms, noticing what the angle of the wrist is doing. I also like to take all 10 fingers together, interwoven, and do figure eights, trying to keep the base of your palms together. You'll move in one direction as slowly or as quickly as you feel is manageable, and then switch it, which is often challenging. Next, we're gonna move into tabletop position, and you're gonna just play with what it feels like to shift the weight over the wrists without an excessive amount of weight on top of the hands. So finding that distance that we just kind of set without weight on the arms. Don't worry about the feet being back yet. You just want to get the shoulders and the hands stacked. Then you're going to shift your weight forward as far as you feel okay. You don't have to go crazy with it, and then back. Right? When we do our chaturanga, we're about there before we lower. Maybe a little sooner. You'll notice too, as I'm moving this, I'm allowing my fingers to catch my weight without cupping the floor in the hands, right? You want to be able to find full palm engagement into the ground through the entire process of that plank to lowering, to lifting up to up dog, and then back to down dog. Once you felt like that's been done enough times, it's feeling pretty good, your next move would be to just flip the hands towards your knees and soften the elbows. So you can get a nice stretch for the wrists and the back. You can also move through a few cat-cows in this and really allow yourself just to free up some space there. Taking it the other way, flipping the hands to the top of the hand. Now when I do this, I feel a lot more pressure. So I keep my elbows bent a little bit out, and I'm not letting myself draw down into the weight of my wrist. I'm taking it very easy. I'm gonna lean back a little bit. You can definitely shift forward too. Eventually we're gonna work more out of the hands. Last but not least, we're gonna do heel of hand raises. So setting up your hands underneath the shoulders, you're gonna lift up the heel of the hand with keeping the thumbs down, and then press back down. Up and down, up and down. You can just do this like 3 sets of 10. Or less, right? Really just get to a place where you're feeling warmed up. If you're a person that experiences a lot of wrist stuff and you've warmed up the wrist and you've gotten about halfway through your class and you're like, well, isn't really worth it anymore to do these in this way. You can try playing with rolling up your mat, as we've suggested in the down dog tutorial, and doing your Chaturanga Vinyasa flow with your heels of the hands a little higher and the fingers dipping down. Now, sometimes what happens for people when they do this is they start to cup the floor. So you're gonna have to really continue that process of pushing down on the inside of the hand. Also, you can play with the dolphin to Sphinx flow, which isn't as fluid moving, right, in your practice, but it will definitely save your wrists, in which case you would take your dolphin, you would come forward to a forearm plank, then you would just lower the hips down and tuck the toes, lift to your Sphinx pose. And then as you go back, you can tuck the toes and scoop the low belly and then lift, retrograding it or reversing it, and then back to down to the dolphin. Thanks so much for joining me for this tutorial. I hope it was helpful. As usual, we may not have hit something that you're curious about, so if you would like to reach out to me, definitely comment below or send me a message. If you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, click the link or follow us on Instagram, Sincerely Trista or Shift Yoga. I hope you have an awesome week. Namaste.